There are some very powerful defensive setups that you can make use of in Path of Exile's Mirage League, and some of those have to do with the fact that Keepers of the Flame went core in 3.28, including the Genesis tree and all of the Foulborn unique items, but there's also the introduction of the Volatile Vaal Orb in this league that allows builds to reach previously unobtainable amounts of stats on unique items. So firstly, let's begin with that core edition of Breach 2.0 and what it means for damage taken as setups, particularly in regards to reaching 100% physical damage shift. Back in patch 3.25, many of the methods of shifting physical damage to be taken as another type were heavily nerfed or even outright removed, and this led to builds being no longer able to reach that magic 100% shift which had previously been so popular for many leagues in a row in terms of the go-to defensive setup to solve incoming physical damage, especially on that lower right side of the passive skill tree. Then in the following league, 3.26, a new unique jewel was introduced, Bound by Destiny, to provide up to 10% of physical damage taken as elemental depending on the Conqueror mod, but this still wasn't enough on its own to cover the nerfs of the previous release. However, in patch 3.27, Keepers of the Flame, new Foulborn uniques were introduced, and some of these items once again unlocked the potential to reach 100% of physical damage taken as other damage types. In that league, we didn't know if Foulborn items would go core, but now that they have been introduced into the core game in 3.28, these defensive setups are now good to go in the core game. So to reach 100% physical damage taken as elemental without the use of Volatile Vaal Orb corruptions, you need to utilise a combination of unique items and Eldritch implicit modifiers. Lightning Coil grants 50% of physical hit damage taken as lightning damage. Note that you can also obtain a Foulborn version of this item to make half of the chaos damage you take be taken as lightning damage, which is quite powerful. Then there's the Dawnbreaker unique shield for up to 20% of physical damage taken as fire damage. That would bring you up to 70% physical damage shift. Then, on the helmet slot, you can roll an Eater of Worlds implicit modifier for up to 8% of physical hit damage taken as elemental damage. And we also have that unique jewel that I previously mentioned, Bound by Destiny, for up to 10% of physical damage taken as elemental damage, but do know that this one requires you to be equipped with 4 specific Conqueror-influenced items before it actually becomes active. Something that's worth mentioning here is that you can obtain influenced unique items as long as it's a core drop pool unique by chancing the correct influenced base. So with all of those components combined at their max rolls, you'd have 88% incoming physical damage shifted to be taken as other damage types. Then the remaining amount needed to reach 100% comes from the new Foulborn Breach Amulets, which can be any one of 4 different items. So there is a little bit of choice available there, and each of these roll up to 15%. Keep in mind that you don't really want to be exceeding 100% damage shift, because unlike damage conversion, this stat is not normalized to 100%, and that means that you'll be taking more damage than the originating hit of incoming damage if you have a lot more than 100%, but going to 101 or 102 will be fine. Now, once you're actually there, you now take all of the incoming physical hit damage as elemental, so stats like armor no longer provide any benefit outside of secondary mechanics like Molten Shell. But this is extremely powerful because those hits will be mitigated by your resistance instead, and at a baseline of 75% resistance, that means that you're only taking a quarter of the damage from incoming physical hits, regardless of how big those hits are. And keep in mind that many physical hits in the game are much smaller than elemental hits because they have to factor in the baseline resistance level. And of course, in terms of mitigation, this is just resistance alone. You can continue to scale the mitigation that you have if you want to by using things like Fortify or Endurance charges or maximum resistance scaling and the likes. So that is a very powerful defensive setup, but there's a pretty big problem with it. It's quite restrictive in terms of what build you can actually use because you're required to make use of specific items in many slots. But in patch 3.28, the new Volatile Vaal Orb has been introduced, and you can see where this is going. This new currency item allows you to exceed the normal limits on modifier rolls by up to 22% of that modifier in either direction, and this means that if you have the budget, you can reach 100% physical damage shift with less items required. And I'll just highlight again, this is going to be very expensive, but it is possible. That's because the Volatile Vaal Orb not only has a 50% chance to simply delete your item, but it also divines modifiers before applying the corruption outcome, so modifiers with a large range, like Dawnbreaker for example, are extremely unlikely to end with a favourable result. But it is possible. So the Lightning Coil can be corrupted with a Volatile Vaal Orb to go up to 61% of physical hit damage taken as lightning damage. That's potentially an extra 11% shift that you didn't have before. The same goes for Dawnbreaker, which can reach up to 24% of physical damage taken as fire. Now that would mean that you have a ridiculous 85% shift from just 2 equipped items. From there you have several options to reach 100%. There's the Foulborn Amulet, there's also the Bound by Destiny Jewel combined with an Eldritch Helmet implicit, and this setup is particularly strong because it frees up either your amulet slot, or it means that you can use a unique helmet or a different influenced helmet if you want to, as you're not limited to either of those choices specifically. Now that's an extremely powerful, albeit expensive defensive setup, but there's another option that becomes available because of the Volatile Vaal Orb, and that's one that makes you take 100% of physical damage as fire damage, which is notable due to its application with Sublime Vision setups to take all cold and lightning damage as fire damage. And again, this is an extremely expensive setup. So the cloak can go to 49% of physical damage taken as fire with a Volatile Vaal Orb corruption. Then Dawnbreaker for 20%, this one is not corrupted because for the Sublime Vision setup you also need the other 2 rolls to be exactly 20%. Then there's the Eldritch Helmet implicit for up to 8% of physical hit damage taken as fire, and a Bound by Destiny Jewel with 4 equipped Warlord items for up to 10% of physical damage taken as fire, and lastly, the Foulborn version of Zoth's Blood or Zoth's Heart for the remaining amount required to reach 100%. As all of these have variable ranges, you don't actually need to have exactly 49% on the Corrupted Cloak, for example. You can get there with a combination of rolls and you actually have a decent amount of wiggle room. But this is just very, very powerful because along with the full Sublime Vision setup, you can focus entirely on fire resistance and you're able to avoid cold and lightning penetration entirely, since shifted damage cannot carry its damage type specific properties to the new damage type. You'd also be very tanky against incoming physical hits, and dots too, since a large portion of that physical shift also applies to damage over time. Okay, so those are the setups there for physical damage shift, but let's move on to one of my favourite defensive setups for 3.28, which makes use of the Volatile Vaal Orb on the Incandescent Heart body armor to obtain up to 30% of elemental hit damage taken as chaos damage. Now this body armor combined with Chaos Inoculation is extremely strong, effectively removing 30% of elemental damage from the equation, as you're immune to that portion of damage that's now being taken as chaos damage. But I think more so than that, I really like the combination of this body armor with Divine Flesh and Bound by Destiny on a life-based build. Divine Flesh makes you take 50% of elemental damage as chaos damage, and Bound by Destiny can provide up to 10% of elemental damage taken as chaos damage when it's equipped with 4 Hunter-influenced items. That means you can reach up to 90% shift for incoming hits, and this is exceptionally powerful due to being able to avoid almost all incoming elemental penetration, whilst also allowing you to scale maximum chaos resistance to benefit mitigation for every single incoming damage type except for physical damage. On top of that, there's also the Fugitive Ring base that was introduced just last league for 2% max chaos res per ring, and you could combine 2 of these along with the 5% that you already gained from Divine Flesh and 2 Born of Chaos small cluster notables to reach 90% maximum chaos resistance. However, I do want to touch on incoming physical damage a little bit because that may be an issue with this type of setup. In that regard, Juggernaut is quite an interesting option here because Unbreakable provides some additional scaling for armor, but it also applies some of your armor to incoming chaos damage, which is ridiculously strong if you have 90% of elemental hit damage taken as chaos, and you're scaling max chaos res on top. Anyway, I just wanted to cover those defensive setups for 3.28 because they're really, really powerful, and I'm planning to cover Ward in my next video because Ward has received quite a few new tools in Mirage, so that's looking quite good too. But that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.